Detective Sarah O'Malley stood on the rocky shore of Boston Harbor, the icy wind whipping her auburn hair around her face. She pulled her coat tighter, the chill of the Atlantic seeping through the thick fabric. The sky was a steely gray, matching the mood of the small crowd gathered near the water's edge. The divers had just surfaced, their expressions a mix of excitement and trepidation. Jake Thompson, the lead diver, approached her first, his wetsuit dripping seawater onto the already damp ground. In his gloved hands, he held a rusted, ancient-looking chest encrusted with barnacles and seaweed. His face was pale, eyes wide with something more than just the cold. "We found this at the bottom," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "It's part of an old shipwreck. Looks like it's been there for centuries. The markings, they're like nothing I've ever seen." Sarah studied the chest, her trained eyes noting the intricate carvings and the eerie, almost malevolent aura it seemed to emit. Boston was no stranger to maritime discoveries, but something about this chest and the fear in Jake's eyes made her uneasy. She had grown up on tales of haunted shipwrecks and ghostly pirates, but she had always dismissed them as just stories. "Let's get this to the lab," she said, masking her unease with professional detachment. "We'll need to examine it thoroughly." As the chest was carefully loaded into a van, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Sarah shivered involuntarily. The sense of dread that had been gnawing at her since the chest was brought ashore grew stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had disturbed something that should have remained buried. The call came in just past midnight. Detective Sarah O'Malley had just settled into bed after a long day of research when her phone rang, the harsh sound cutting through the silence of her apartment. Groggily, she answered, her heart sinking as she listened to the dispatcher's urgent tone. "Detective, we've got a body. It's Jake Thompson, found dead in his apartment. No signs of foul play, but you're going to want to see this." Sarah's mind raced as she quickly dressed and headed out into the cold Boston night. The streets were quiet, the city shrouded in an eerie calm. She arrived at Jake's apartment building, a modest brick structure in South Boston, its exterior washed in the blue and red lights of the police cars parked outside. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Officers moved about with grim efficiency, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and unease. Sarah flashed her badge and made her way up to Jake's apartment, the sense of dread from earlier returning with full force. Jake's body lay in the middle of the living room, surrounded by a perimeter of yellow tape. His face was twisted in a grotesque mask of terror, eyes wide and unseeing. It was a sight that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She had seen death in many forms, but this was different. This was pure, unadulterated fear. Detective O'Malley, the medical examiner, Dr. Laura Chen, greeted her with a somber nod. "I've never seen anything like this. No physical injuries, no signs of struggle. It's as if he died of fright." Sarah crouched beside the body, her eyes scanning the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but there was an unsettling presence, a feeling of being watched. She noticed the trail of salt water leading from the front door to where Jake lay. It was puzzling and out of place, adding to the mystery. "Have you found anything unusual?" Sarah asked, looking up at Dr. Chen. "Just the salt water," Dr. Chen replied. And this. She handed Sarah a small, ornate coin, its surface tarnished but the design unmistakably old. It was clutched in his hand. Looks like it came from the chest. Sarah took the coin, a sinking feeling in her stomach. The connection to the shipwreck was undeniable. She needed answers, and fast. Back at the station, Sarah pored over her notes and the maritime records she had been studying. The more she read about Blackbeard and his cursed crew, the more convinced she became that they had unleashed something dark and malevolent. The curse was real, and it was claiming lives. Determined to find a solution, Sarah arranged to meet Professor Thomas Hargrove at his office in the morning. She needed to understand the nature of the curse and how to stop it. The next day, the sun barely piercing through the overcast sky, Sarah arrived at Boston University, where Professor Hargrove held a position in the Department of History and Folklore. His office was a cluttered space filled with books, maps, and artifacts, a testament to his lifelong passion for maritime history. Detective O'Malley, Hargrove greeted her warmly, though his expression was serious. "I've heard about the incident. Tragic and quite unusual. Please sit down." Sarah wasted no time recounting the events of the past few days and showing him the coin they had found in Jake's hand. Hargrove listened intently, his brow furrowing with concern. "The legends of Blackbeard's crew are well documented," he began. "They were known for their ruthlessness, and it is said that they cursed their treasure to prevent it from being taken by anyone else. Disturbing their graves could very well have unleashed their wrath." Sarah leaned forward, her gaze intense. "How do we stop it?" Hargrove sighed, leaning back in his chair. "The only way to appease the spirits and lift the curse is to return the treasure to its resting place and perform a ritual to honor and pacify them. It's a delicate process, and there's no guarantee it will work, but it's our best shot." As Sarah left the university, her mind was racing with the enormity of the task ahead. The city was in danger, and time was running out. The days following Jake Thompson's death were filled with an uneasy silence. The divers who had initially been so excited about their discovery now avoided each other, haunted by an unspoken fear. Sarah could feel the weight of the city's collective dread as she made her way through the streets of Boston. The usually bustling city seemed subdued, its people wary and on edge. The deaths continued, each one as mysterious and horrifying as Jake's. The second victim was Maria Sanchez, another member of the diving team. Her body was found in her kitchen, eyes wide open and face contorted in terror, much like Jake. A pool of salt water surrounded her, and clutched in her hand was another ancient coin, identical to the one found with Jake. Sarah stood in Maria's kitchen, her heart pounding. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than she had anticipated. She needed to act quickly. Desperate for answers, Sarah returned to Professor Hargrove's office. The professor greeted her with a grave expression, clearly aware of the growing danger. "Detective O'Malley," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been researching the legends surrounding Blackbeard and his crew. The curse is real and it's powerful. The spirits of the pirates are bound to their treasure, and anyone who disturbs it faces their wrath." Sarah nodded, her expression determined. "We need to perform the ritual you mentioned. We need to return the treasure and appease the spirits. How do we do that? Hargrove handed her an old leather-bound book. This contains the ritual. It's a combination of ancient words and offerings that must be made at the site of the shipwreck. The spirits need to be honored, and their treasure returned to its rightful place. Armed with the professor's knowledge and the ritual book, Sarah gathered the surviving members of the diving team and the necessary resources. Convincing them to return to the site was no easy task. Fear and skepticism were written on their faces, but the mounting deaths left them no choice. "We have to try," Sarah urged, her voice steady. "We owe it to Jake and Maria. We can't let this curse destroy any more lives." Reluctantly, they agreed. Plans were made to return to the shipwreck site and carry out the ritual. The night before their departure, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, reading through the ritual book. The words were ancient, the meanings obscure, but she knew they held the key to saving the city. The following evening, under the cover of darkness, Sarah and her team set out on a small boat, heading towards the location of the shipwreck. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the lapping of the waves against the boat. Sarah's heart pounded as they approached the site, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her. As they reached the site, a heavy silence fell over the group. The ocean seemed unnaturally still, the air thick with an oppressive weight. Sarah and Professor Hargrove began to prepare for the ritual, setting out the items they had brought: candles, ancient coins, and offerings of food and drink. The sky above was cloudy, the moon barely visible through the thick haze. Sarah lit the candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the water. She began to chant the ancient words from the book, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Suddenly, the water around them began to churn, and ghostly figures emerged, their spectral forms glowing in the dim light. The spirits of Blackbeard's crew hovered menacingly, their hollow eyes fixed on the intruders. Sarah's heart raced, but she continued the ritual, her voice unwavering. Professor Hargrove joined in, his deep voice blending with hers. The spirits circled them, their presence a chilling reminder of the curse's power. The air grew colder, the wind picking up and whipping around them. As they neared the end of the ritual, the spirits let out an eerie wail, their forms flickering like candles in a storm. Sarah held her breath, hoping that the ritual would work. She chanted the final words, her voice ringing out over the water. For a moment, everything was still. Then, slowly, the spirits began to dissipate, their forms fading into the night. The water calmed, and an eerie silence settled over the group. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The treasure returning to its rightful place, the ritual was complete. Exhausted but relieved, the team began their journey back to shore. The journey back to shore was quiet, each person lost in their thoughts. The first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a golden light over the water. The city of Boston slowly came into view, and with it, a sense of normalcy began to return. As they docked, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The weight of the past few days was finally catching up with her. She knew they had succeeded, but the memory of the ghostly pirates and the lives lost would stay with her forever. Back on solid ground, Sarah and her team were met with curious stares and questions from the few early risers who had seen their return, but they were too tired to explain. The story would come out in time, but for now they needed rest. As Sarah walked home, the city awakening around her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The spirits had been appeased, the curse lifted, and Boston was safe once more. But the legend of the ghostly Galleon would live on, a cautionary tale for those who dared to disturb the resting places of the past. The city of Boston slowly returned to its bustling routine, but the events of the past weeks had left an indelible mark. News of the mysterious deaths and the haunting legends had spread, and while the exact details remained shrouded in secrecy, whispers of the ghostly Galleon and the courageous detective who faced down its curse were on everyone's lips. Detective Sarah O'Malley became a reluctant local hero. Though she shunned the spotlight, her colleagues and the community looked at her with newfound respect and awe. Her bravery had not only saved lives, but also restored a sense of security to a city that had been on the brink of hysteria. As Sarah walked through the familiar streets, the sense of closure was palpable. The ocean's grip on the city had loosened, and the chilling presence that had lingered in the air was gone. Yet, the memory of those who had perished and the spectral figures she had confronted stayed with her, a somber reminder of the ordeal. A month later, a ceremony was held at the Boston Maritime Museum to honor the victims and to unveil an exhibit dedicated to the shipwreck. The centerpiece was the chest, now encased in glass, surrounded by historical artifacts and detailed accounts of the events. Sarah stood quietly in the crowd, her heart heavy as the names of the deceased were read aloud. Detective O'Malley, a familiar voice, broke her reverie. It was Professor Thomas Hargrove, looking as somber as she felt. "You did a remarkable thing, you know. It's not every day one faces down the supernatural and lives to tell the tale." Sarah smiled faintly. "It wasn't just me, Professor. It was all of us. We faced it together." Hargrove nodded, his eyes twinkling with respect. "Even so, your leadership was crucial. I've been thinking. There's so much we still don't understand about these curses and legends. Maybe we should collaborate, delve deeper into the history, and perhaps prevent something like this from happening again." Sarah considered this. The idea of diving back into the world of ghost stories and ancient curses was daunting, but she also felt a strange sense of duty. "I'll think about it," she said, giving him a genuine smile. "But for now, I think we all need a break from the supernatural." As the ceremony concluded, Sarah made her way to the edge of the harbor. The water was calm, reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. She stood there for a long time, lost in thought. The city was at peace, and for the first time in weeks, so was she. That night, as she returned to her apartment, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey. The fear, the courage, the teamwork, it had all brought them to this point. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for her colleagues, for Professor Hargrove, and for the strength she had discovered within herself. Boston had returned to its normal rhythm, but the story of the ghostly Galleon had become part of its rich tapestry of history and legend. Tourists and locals alike would speak of the cursed ship and the brave detective who lifted the curse, turning a tale of terror into one of resilience and triumph. Months later, Sarah received a package at her office. Inside was a letter from Professor Hargrove, accompanied by an old, leather-bound journal. The letter read, "Dear Sarah, I've come across this journal in my recent research. It belonged to a sailor who survived Blackbeard's last voyage. I believe it might hold more clues about the curses and legends we've encountered. Whether you choose to explore further or keep it as a memento, I thought it fitting that you have it. Best regards, Thomas Hargrove. Sarah ran her fingers over the worn cover, feeling a connection to the past. She placed the journal on her desk, a symbol of the journey she had undertaken and the unknown adventures that lay ahead. As she looked out of her office window, the city stretched out before her, vibrant and alive. The sun cast a warm glow over the skyline, and Sarah knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, but the spirit of Boston, resilient, courageous, and unyielding, would always endure.